everybody. Welcome to the presentation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my research project. And I'll cut straight to it. So, the research question is, how can the use of blockchain help communities increase the sustainability of the commons? So, whenever you have a collection, a group of individuals who live in an area, we speak about a community, and they will use certain resources. And that resource is shared and finite, hence the name common, since everyone has that resource in common. And we can take a pond of fish, just as an example. And what happened is you will, at some point, have some individuals who, out of just being comfortable, will start to overfish just because they want to store the fish in the fridge and they become greedy. That triggers, for example, scarcity in other people who then adapt the same behavior, even though they are doing it just as a reaction. And in the end of the day, the common is being abused. The third one, which is also common, which you see, is you just have people who just don't care. They don't understand how the common works. They don't question it. They just use it, and they're very, they're very reckless in their way of doing things. And that's how I think that most people deal with electricity. People don't question how electricity is being produced and how it works. They just use it. I just press a button, my TV goes on and off. So I'm viewing electricity as a common, and my goal is to come up with a solution on how rural communities, which means people who are not integrated to the pre-existing infrastructure, can govern themselves and they can achieve sustainability with the power supply. So you can ignore everything outside of these four houses in the middle. You can view these four houses as a community. You will have something which I call or is referred to as a prosumer. That's a mix of the word producer and consumer, which means this house has solar panels on its roof, produces power for itself, and can sell the power to neighboring houses, and so can also sustain itself. And the goal is really to have a peer-to-peer approach, which is why I have this P2P, where individuals can trade electricity among each other without really needing the national grid. However, it should be integratable at some point so that it can be really so that as a bigger authority, I can really govern everything. Uh, why blockchain is also part of it is because blockchain is known as it comes with a great consensus mechanism. It's fully transparent, it's scalable, and it's the most used DLT, distributed ledger technology in research papers when it comes to this kind of topics. And speaking of research papers, of course, I've been reading a few, and I've come to the conclusion that I can cluster all the papers that I've read into four categories: behavioral economics, electricity markets, blockchain, and legal. Now, behavioral economics is really the backbone. This is what we focus on. We focus on game theory and how participants behave in the community. And then, after understanding them, we look at the electricity market, how it works, for example, the peak energy consumption during lunchtime, and how we can predict behavior if we were to engage in peer-to-peer energy trading. Then we look at blockchain. What has currently been done? Where does technology stand? What are the limitations? And how will human behavior be able to adapt into the use of blockchain? And then we look at, of course, the legal aspects. Now, these four categories are interconnected, and they're interconnected in my conceptual framework. It's a bit small, but I mean, you have it in the research paper. Uh, but the goal here is to show you how the topics are interconnected. This is not the final thing. I mean, I'm going to add way more, but what you see here is like one aspect or one of the sectors of my literature review, which is the legal aspect and the decentralized technology. And you'll notice that, for example, I took the liability and then I compared it with, for example, the smart grid, which uses smart contracts. Now, the question becomes, if the smart contract fails to send money, let's say participant A buys power from participant B and the transaction fails, but someone already paid and the power never came. The question is, who's held accountable? Who's liable? So I'm trying to show that the single aspects are interconnected. And at the same time, I need a way to look at real world projects and come up with some kind of an approach to say, okay, how do we come up with the schema to govern communities on feasible projects which exist right now based on the papers I've read? And for that, I need a framework. And that framework is Ostrom's design principles. Now, she was a Nobel Prize winner who drafted these 8 design principles. And I will point out they are far from perfect. However, I found they are a very good match for the project that I'm currently engaging in. And I will admit, we can still challenge them on many dimensions, which I do within my paper. But to make things simple for now, I'm just going to walk you through them. So there's design principles 1 to 8, and it's just a set of rules which you have to, or aspects, which you have to look into how to come up with the schema on how to govern commons. So for example, graduated sanctions. You will have individuals within who will just abuse or try to game the system. And the goal is to not fully remove them. It's to punish them in a way that they feel that it wasn't worth it. However, they're still part of the community because you still need them. So I took these design principles, these 8, and said, okay, this is going to be the backbone of my methodology, which consists of 2 parts. First, I investigate secondary data, and then I create primary data. So I'll start with the investigation of secondary data. I collect 50 projects. This is just some random number. It could be also 100, but I collect the number of projects, and then I disqualify unsuitable projects. I had projects which are like some scam projects, in my opinion, projects which were not transparent enough, projects which seemed not feasible. And with my background, I think I'm technical enough to understand where some limitations lie, and I disqualify those projects. Now I'm left with, let's say, 30 projects. Those 30 projects, I have to find a way to rank them using these design principles. Okay? But the thing is, this can be very subjective. So I used the scoring model. I wanted to go with the weighted decision matrix or with the expert judgment first, but I noticed that it doesn't work because if I use the expert judgment, research papers come out every week. And the expert who I would rely on, I would have to view their opinion as absolute. And that makes no sense in such a futuristic thing, which is updated day by day or week by week. So I use the scoring model. And the benefits of the scoring model is it allows me to list the criteria which I wish. It allows me to ignore if they're interconnected. It allows me to use it for big and small projects, so I can ignore the size. The scope of criteria is not limited, and I can define what's the lowest rank, the highest rank, and which requirements have to be met to rank a project in a certain way. Then I proceed and I write summaries of the project and I collect all the data for the project so that I have it in so that I've gained understanding of every project and see in which way they all go, and then I rank them. It's important to know that. So I take design principle 1 on a project and say, okay, if these 3 things are met, it can reach the highest score for design principle 1. If these 7 things are met, it can make the highest score for design principle 2, and so on. So it's 8 columns. After ranking them, I conduct non-parametrical statistics, and I do that because I don't collect that much data. I mean, it's only 29 or maybe only 25 projects, so it's not that much. But what's interesting is to see how I can group the design principles in factors to know how many factors describe the variance of my data, how on average the projects rank, which design principle is the best, which ranks the highest in most cases, which ranks the lowest. And then I use everything I've learned so far to draft my initial schema and I summarize my conclusions. Then I get to the part where I create primary data. And now this is where you can see here like this skill matrix where I take design principle 1 and I gave it, for example, a 3 for this specific project. And well, after ranking, I engage in a conversation with which is a triple blind process. So I will have 2 people who have nothing to do with the project rank the project as well. I am biased and subjective, so I want to come up with an objective view of things. So those people are going to rank the projects as well and give me their opinion. And then we're going to sit together and have a synthesis where we exchange in a conversation how they rank the projects, how I rank them. If in a design principle, I ranked the project, let's say a 3, they ranked it a 5, and they can convince me, we take their number. If I can convince them, we stick with my number. And if we both can convince each other, we take the average, just to be more objective instead of just viewing things from my perspective. Followed by then, of course, the final ranking, because after the synthesis, we will change our opinion and I will gain deeper insights and come up with already certain questions. But I don't conduct a questionnaire here yet. I don't. What I do is I revise my initial schema and I will come back later to the questions. So the primary data is still going to be collected while I'm still creating my schema, which is like the real conclusion of this thesis. So the schema, for example, can be something like this. It consists of 2 parts. And if you look at both parts, I'm going to start here. So the conclusion I came up to so far is that I will need a standardization of the software, of the hardware, everything within a community. And then on the second layer, I will then pivot into full digitization. Then I will withdraw the authority of certain community members who I gave more authority than others. And then we go to the integration layer. It's important to know that you can go back and forth. So you can go from point 3 to point 2. So this is a continuous process. Now, what do I mean with integration? So far, I've learned that the government has to pass some kind of legislation and a set of rules, because based on the papers I've read, if you let communities do what they want, you will have a lot of companies which are just going to game the system, maximize their profit, and make communities fully dependable on them. So the government is going to be in between and is going to set the bar, which means they are the authority who passes the rules in terms of whatever conclusions I come up with for my schema. They have access to every trading platform where power is being traded, and the communities are interconnected through an integration layer, which is the blockchain. So there could be sub blockchains, but there's one public blockchain where everything is connected. And that is in full control of the government, because this is a monopolistic market. And if they ever wish to integrate it with the pre-existing infrastructure, they have the power to do that. And it's important that they really can control everything. And while drafting this schema, I will come up with questions. I will come up with things where I notice I missed something, I really made a mistake, or I didn't dive deep enough on certain things, which will lead me back again to my collection of creation of primary data. And then I'm going to get back to my questionnaire again. So while drafting the schema, I will come up with questions, and I will then really go back to and maybe conduct 2 interviews, maybe 3, maybe 4, depending on how much I need. And of course, it's going to be far from perfect, but I think if I can define the limitations of my schema where it really works, provide context into the rules that I create, because like you cannot let individuals just set the bidding prices to trade power as they wish. Some papers even indicated that you even reached a point where you had racism. And those are aspects which I did not know until I like really discovered them in paper. So I'm going to give context to my schema, and depending on the size of a country where this schema can be adapted to, you will have cultural differences. And this is why like you have to go through all 4 phases where you really have to set the standard, and then you go back and forth, as in my 4 layers. And I will point out, of course, further areas of research, because I've really noticed that there's still much which can be done. But based on how it's going so far, I think I'm on the right path. And thank you very much for listening. Looking forward to your feedback.